Good morning, Devils fans. It is 7:05 on 7/7, and with us still waiting for the dominoes to fall in free agency, I want to take today's episode to go over what our defensive pairings may look like heading into next season, as it is my opinion that our defense is set with the contracts we have in-house, and that we can draw some conclusions based on numbers we saw at the end of regular season through playoffs and especially in those last games of playoffs. I will be referencing some time on ice numbers between all of our guys, and for that I did use daubersports.com yet again. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on all the numbers there, but it's a great website with resources going over all different facets of line pairings. So if you did want to take a deeper look at that, feel free to reference that website as well. So I think the boring answer is usually the one that goes with, especially when it comes to NHL coaching. But I'm going to take a slightly different spin compared to what I have seen the majority of Devils fans out there putting together. So, in my opinion, our seven defensemen we will go into the season with is Siegenthaler, Dougie, Luke, Marino, Miller, Nemec, and Kevin Ball. The notable exception being Brendan Smith, who I think will, depending on how our forwards are looking heading in, find himself on waivers as we are not a team to carry 8 defensemen throughout the entire year. I'm of this opinion because I think Nemec will force his way onto the roster and make it impossible for us to send him back down, even though, as I have said previously, management is usually very hesitant to put a guy that's not waiver exempt through those for fear of losing an asset completely for free. But when you have a young stud defenseman like Nemec who can come in and light it on fire, especially compared to what Smith will bring offensively, it is going to be very hard to not go that route. So, what could the combinations actually look like? So, my fun answer is by season's end, or at least hopefully at some point, especially I think in playoffs when you get a bit more actual matchup determination. I think, and I would like to see, Luke and Dougie playing a whole bunch of ice together. They should be our two best defensemen, and so they should be on the ice way more than anybody else. In the regular season, they absolutely dominated play together. It was not even close as far as offensive chances generated versus offensive chances against. But in the playoffs, there was way too small of a sample size to really draw any sort of conclusion. Obviously, in playoffs, Luke did not come in towards the end. In the regular season, same thing. But they actually had an okay amount of ice time together to end the regular season. Between the two of them was a little over 15 minutes. Not much to really draw too many conclusions to, but the sheer dominance of that 15 minutes is hard to ignore. That would then bring us to our second pairing, which would be Siegenthaler Marino. So they had 55 minutes of time together in the regular season with not amazing results by any means, as they were pretty thoroughly shelled. However, in 15 minutes, which is not a very large sample size, in the playoffs they actually had pretty good results, actually slightly outchancing their opponents in in that time on ice. So from 55 minutes in the regular season getting absolutely outchanced, at least offensively. Now, this is clearly a defensive type pairing. The offensive ability between those two is not nothing, but there is not an absolute driver on that like a Luke, Dougie, or Nemec would be, which actually does make me think through most of the regular season, we probably go with the boring answer. As we know, Siegs and Dougie are a proven commodity, put up really good numbers together, and have a synergy that has now been built over multiple seasons. So I do think that is the more likely route that we start the season with and probably play a majority of the season with. That Luke Dougie pairing will absolutely pop its head up from time to time, especially when we are behind in games, or that Siegs Marino pairing when we are ahead in the later part of games. But I think that we see that more so come playoff time. Luke Marino, which if we go with Dougie, Luke Marino is then the next obvious choice in that second pairing. To end playoffs, they had about 21 minutes of ice together and actually put up some pretty decent numbers. They did not play pretty much, I think, a single moment of the regular season when Luke came in together. So we really just have to draw it from those playoffs. Uh, and considering the fact that that was only against Carolina with those two, and that we were pretty much thoroughly outplayed across the board in that series, it's very hard to draw conclusions on exactly what that pairing may look like together in the long term. Obviously, it's very hard to think what any pairing will do long term outside of large multiple season sample sizes together. But considering how poorly that series went on the whole, they actually had decent numbers in those 21 minutes, which should give us really good optimism heading into the season with that pairing. So that brings us to our bottom pairing. This is where I kind of deviate from most Devils fans. I think that top four we all agree is fairly locked in, outside of Nemec, I guess, or Ball even coming in like a thunderstorm on this team. But I just don't quite see that, especially because hockey tends to be boring and you will stick with what you have in known commodities. So for the bottom pairing, Miller actually played most of his time on the left side, as I have previously discussed, being on that top pair in Dallas with Heiskanen. So I think he is the perfect pairing with Nemec. If you do assume Nemec plays his way onto this team, Miller is the obvious choice. Miller has the experience with a young, offensive-minded defenseman, puck mover, and really just being the hold it down kind of guy on that type of pairing. And Nemec is that young, offensive minded dynamo defenseman who needs that anchor on his side to really get the most use out of him. Especially with Nemec actually having a fairly decent transition game, I think Miller pairs quite nicely with him. What's nice about Miller is he can play both sides. He did play a little bit on the right in Dallas, and I've seen him penciled in and even listed as right defenseman for the Devils in most line pairings that have been put out so far this offseason. So if you do have some movement up and down the lineup, if you wanted to play like a crazy offensive minded game with Luke Dougie top pairing, throw in, I guess, Siegenthaler with Nemec on the second pairing, and then go Miller, Marino on that bottom pairing, trying to kind of generate some of that like Severson magic of having a guy way above a third pairing skill set in Marino being on that bottom pair. I think it could work. I don't think it's likely. Again, I think that's more so if someone is injured or just unforeseen circumstances and needing to jumble the pairings. That obviously leaves Ball on the outside looking in most of this discussion. I think he is proving himself, but it became fairly apparent by the end of playoffs that he has a bit more growth needed. He did find himself at one point on the top pair with Dougie. I think that was more so just trying to get him going. But there was definitely large stretches, not just in the regular season, but playoffs as well, where he played very, very well. I think there's just a bit more development to his game to come. But I think he is a full-time NHLer, full stop. And we could even see him possibly outplay Miller for a spot, ending up with Nemec on a pair, or maybe a few other combinations. Only time will tell. It's a very exciting time with this defense. I don't think it's very crazy to say it will take a slight step back from last season. Graves and Severson were veterans in the NHL, and we are going to be bringing in likely a very young player in Nemec, and then a guy from outside the system in Miller. Especially for defensive pairings, they need to build that synergy together and get used to a system, especially our system for Miller. It is going to be very, very, very different from Dallas. So there will be absolutely growing pains, especially early on. So please be patient with them and let them grow into this. We, I think, have a little bit of leeway. We set a absolute franchise record last season, so expect a step back from that points wise. But I still think we are fighting for the top of the Metro, regardless of that. So with a little bit of breathing room now for Ruff, we started the season with Fire Lindy chants. I'm always against those. I thought that was absolutely ridiculous to say. I will do another episode on that as we get deeper into the offseason at some point, I'm sure. But now he has a bit of leeway. He is getting extended again, although that contract's not quite out. And I think he has the ability now, being thoroughly entrenched in our system, to let mistakes happen, lose some games off of some younger defensemen and trying some things out. Dropping a few points here and there is not going to kill us, as I think regardless of that, again, we will be fighting for that top spot, maybe not just in the Metro, but in the East, as Boston is not going to put up another historic season. So with all that being said, obviously there is the chance Nemec does not play his way onto the team, and then we are going to see something like Ball Miller bottom pairing with Smith as the seventh defenseman, which is also completely serviceable and fine, although a bit more boring for my taste. I think with the way our team plays, having those puck movers of Dougie top pair with Siegs, Luke with Marino, and the Nemec bottom pair, we have full offense octane type players on every pairing to keep this offense rolling throughout the entire season. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on this. I know it's a bit of a departure from what I'm seeing from most Devils fans, but I think it's the best way to go. Looking at the numbers, just trying to plot it out in my head of how each of these lines could play with our full forward group as well. I think there's a lot of great options here. It could go a bunch of different ways, but man, oh man, are they going to be a lot of fun to watch. One last note on our defense as I was going through all the different line combos and offensive generation versus chances against. Boy, oh boy, did Severson absolutely dominate no matter what pairing he had. I'm talking every guy he was with, they put up pretty much the best numbers of the night. It purely going by how many chances did we have on the offensive zone versus against us on the defensive zone. Now, a lot of that probably is matchups. He was mostly the third pairing guy. He is going to get the easier matchups, and as we've said, he thrived in that type of situation as he is a bona fide top four, arguably top two type defenseman. So it is a large hole to fill for Nemec, but if there was ever someone to do it, I think a second overall offensive dynamo like Nemec could be the one to do it, as he will also be bottom pairing likely for the entire season. So please, guys, let me know what you think. How likely is any of this to actually happen? How crazy am I for the Luke Dougie Siegs Marino pairing? Again, I think that's mostly a playoff type scenario where you get your handpick of the matchups for the most part, compared to regular season where we're just going to kind of want to roll lines out there. But I think no matter what, this defense will be fun if Nemec is on it. If you have any strong opinions one way or the other, please leave a comment, share it with your friends, help them find me. I will see you guys tomorrow, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Let's go Devils.